You're in the era where the human has to be the most creative.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Right?
Yeah, we'll do that.
All right. Hey, everyone. Hey, everybody. Welcome to AI Tools for Human Creativity. We're really excited that you're here with us. This is the first ever Builder Stage at I/O, so welcome. My name is Matthew Carey.
And I'm Alex. So we're from a team called Google Creative Lab. We're a team of writers, designers, coders, and filmmakers. And we have a pretty fun job. I really enjoy it. We get to collaborate with research and product teams across Google. We get to play with all the latest AI models, sort of explore the edges of what's possible. I grew up playing music. I played viola, piano, made a lot of music. But I also got into coding really early. So I feel like my whole life I've been wanting to try to blend code, design, and music.
Yeah, I also grew up making music. I was a choir boy, then a theater kid, which we won't talk about anymore. Got into making films, then copywriting, and then interactive art, which is when I first met Creative Lab. So I think we're both pretty creatively omnivorous. We just love to make things, and these days we really love helping shape the tools that help other people make things. That's because we really see technology as a blank canvas, and it's really the human imagination that shapes the technology into new stories and new ways of telling stories.
And we feel like everything is moving fast. So if you feel like things are moving fast, even inside Google, we also feel it too. It seems like there's a new tool, new model every day that you're supposed to stay on top of and catch up. But at the same time, we think some things are not changing at all. Like, we really believe human collaboration has to become, and always has been, and has to stay the center of the creative process. And that's why we're really excited about sessions like this, where we can actually talk to each other. Say, like, what are you using? What's working? What do you like? What don't you like? And share work and inspire each other.
Yeah, if you saw yesterday's keynote, you heard from Suze, who's one of our partners in crime at the Creative Lab. And she talked about how at Google we're building tools with creatives and for creatives. And so we're working with all kinds of artists outside of Google to really shape the technology and build the tools in the way they want. But today, you're going to sort of get an inside look from a contingent of really imaginative creatives that are working on the inside.
So we have an amazing lineup of creatives. They're all going really deep on Google's creative tools, from Google Flow to Flow Music, Antigravity, AI Studio, and more. They're even building interactive worlds with Project Genie. But more importantly, we wanted them to make sure that they don't just come up here and show you things that they made, but actually go deep of how they made it. And I think that's something you just can't feel without being in the room together and actually sharing the process, your sketches, how much work and love you put into the stuff you made.
Yeah, so you're going to get the what they made, the how they made it, but also, my favorite, the why they made it. There's a lot of really tasty ideas and insights from the people you're about to meet, so we won't waste any more of your time. I'm really stoked to introduce you to our first speaker, Sanchit. Sanchit, yeah, give it up. Sanchit first came through Creative Lab almost 4 years ago. It's really hard to imagine how fast time goes. We were all immediately blown away by his craft, the sheer beauty of the imagery he creates, and also, as you'll see, his very calming vibes. Sanchit, we worked hand in hand with him to really shape and imagine what a filmmaking tool from Google could be like. And so his work was really central to conceiving, designing, and then launching Google Flow at I/O 1 year ago. And since then, Sanchit's been embedded within Google Labs in the design and UX team at Flow, and helping really evolve that tool into a full-on AI creative studio. There's a ton of talk I think we're all hearing about taste right now. And Sanchit's really living proof of what happens when someone with impeccable taste has the room to run. So help me welcome him to the stage.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sanchit. I am a design generalist, and I work at Flow, Google Flow. I make images, videos, and products. But I used to be a design student at some point. I used to study graphic design, and today the student version of me and the professional version of me would like to talk about how we're both using the tools that are in front of us. So back in design school, I was so in awe of the work around me, and the most common question, or the favorite question that I used to ask my superiors was, which software did you use to make this? Because they were using digital tools back then, and I never got a straight answer. The most common answer I got to that question was, that's the wrong question, and the question you should be asking is, what was your thought process? And I realized that nothing has changed from there. Currently, the question is, what was your prompt? And what's wrong with both these questions is, it assumes that if you have access to the prompt, or if you have access to the same tools as I did, you'll be able to replicate my ideas and my process. But that's just not the case, because it's not about the tools. It's about the fundamentals. And I was fortunate enough to go to a design school where we were not taught any design tools. Like, our foundational program was focused on learning design drawing, analytical drawing. We used to paint color wheels with paint brushes, draw type with pencil, and just going through all these foundational courses like Gestalt and composition and typography. I feel like it really prepared me for a world where I didn't have to rely on tools, and I could use any tool that I wanted. And what I'm trying to say with that is, I started with the pencil, I started with using the brush, and then when I graduated, I used the digital versions of those tools. I picked up 3D modeling and motion design, and I was able to pick those up because I had strong fundamentals. So I moved to the digital tools, and now what I'm using is my vocabulary when it comes to like AI tools. And a thing to note here is, it's not that I've left the pencil and the digital tools behind. It's an additive process. I'm using a mixture of all of those. And why the vocabulary is so important is because I had to go through using manual tools to be able to learn the terminologies, and then now I can use them in my prompts. So what does it mean to be a good prompter? I don't think anyone has like one good way of like prompting, but for me, how I do it is, my prompts are informed by all those fundamentals that I learned in design school. So I've internalized all of that, and in my prompts, that starts to show up. A prompt is never the same. Like, I don't follow the same structure, but I make sure that I talk about texture, color, composition. If there's type in it, I'll define what kind of type I'll be using. And in this particular example, I have a ray traced 3D rendered style. So my experience with 3D modeling and rendering pays off here, where I can reference the right terminology. And I would just invite everyone to like try to imagine this prompt and what it would look like. And that's what it looks like. So because I know what Nouveau typography looks like, I'm able to create this with precision, and I know it's going to look like this. And there's so much difference between just saying elegant typography and elegant Nouveau typography, and that's the difference. That's the difference between like going through the design curriculum and being an actual type designer versus someone who's referencing things only. Let's look at another prompt. Here, I'm actually being really precise with the hex codes. I created this color palette separately, and I made sure that this is the exact color I wanted. So I included that in the prompt. I have a composition section. Then I have a photography section where I'm talking about using a 300 lens because I want less distortion, and this is what that prompt looks like. Let's do one more. Setting, color, deciding what kind of like subject to use here. And the last line is really important, where it says off-center, rule of thirds, section composition. And had I not gone through the composition course in design school, I would not have been able to communicate and articulate my ideas properly. So everyone can have good ideas, but you need to be able to articulate your ideas, and that comes from experience. Another thing that hasn't changed is I used to have a process, and I still have a process, and that is what makes the work ownable. I see a lot of people talking about one-shotting certain things, and it's amazing that we can do that, but it's not satisfying for me to one-shot. And the only way I can author AI work is through iteration. Even if the prompts look like, oh, this is the perfect prompt, you can reuse it, I might have gone through multiple iterations of that prompt to craft it and to get the language right. I used to start with sketches, and I still start with sketches. Sometimes that's the easiest way to put your thoughts down on paper. And on the left is an example of a 3D model I made, and then I used a ray tracing software to render it and make an animation. And on the right, I made some sketches, visualized this furniture line, and then I rendered it with Nano Banana inside Google Flow. And just to like take you a little deeper into that process, in Google Flow, we have image making and video making tools. So in this particular interface, I am starting with that sketch of the chair, but then I'm changing the legs, I'm changing the background, I'm adding a polar bear, and then finally ending up with that kind of composition. And something to note here is, I didn't think of the cats in the beginning, but they showed up somehow. And that's just what I mean by a process. Like, you discover your work through multiple iterations. And that's just what I love about working inside this image editor, which lets you record your version history on the right. I used to learn how to rig a character, and that was not an enjoyable process. But now I can directly explore a character's movement logic in Flow with frame animation. And I'm not saying character rigging is dead. Like, that's definitely the best way to get control over a character. But for me as a graphic designer to enter the world of characters and 3D modeling, it's a nice entry. Wanted to show some more examples of this character I was working on. This is the character creator tool in Google Flow. And this character is called Frothko, which is just an empty vessel. And depending on the day, like, the beverage changes. You can see Vacation Frothko is having a cocktail, and then on a hot summer day is enjoying a soft serve. So after I'm done making these still images, I can make multiple variations of one character. I can then start to explore motion dynamics. And certain things that cannot be rigged, I'm able to play with those, like the liquid simulation. So the first one is like melancholic Frothko. The second one is surprised Frothko. And the third one is probably listening to music. I used to iterate, and I iterate a lot more with AI. What AI allows is abundance, and that's definitely a blessing and a curse, where you can have infinite number of variations of one thing, but then you have to know where to stop and say, okay, that's the one that I really, really like, and then no more. So what happens is a lot of variations pile up, and in Flow, what I try to do is like try to stay organized. And what's happening is, like, I'm making little tweaks with every variation. So even though I have like 100 variations of the same character, maybe the 50th one is actually the one that I selected. And it's cool to be able to see the journey of how to craft one thing. This is the way for me to craft. Like, I don't think craft is dead. Working on something for a really long time, spending time on it, I think that's what craft is about. It's not just about using your hands. I used to make things. Now I make things that make things. And what that means is I'm a graphic designer, but now I make products. And how I can make products is through vibe coding. And Flow tools allow you to do that within Flow. I can create my own tool like any other tool like AI Studio, but what's good is I have access to all my assets which exist in my projects in Flow, and then I can make the tools and use the same assets here. I'm going to give you an example of something I made. So on the left is a style that I developed over 10 years. I used to love working with gradients, and this is like a pulsating, continuous gradient animation that I developed. And I did that by making vector shapes, animating them, and then exploring blending modes between those vector shapes. And on the right, what I did was distilled that style into a brush. And it felt like inventing a new medium. It was so fun to see. I could own this because there's a direct connection between the two images. But the right one is more interactive. And it really felt like using a brush that I hadn't played with before, and being able to use the parameters in real time. That was really rewarding for me. And I could, on the fly, change the parameters, change the color of the gradients, and change the speed of the animation. It was just something that I hadn't played with before. But at the same time, I'm able to do this because I already was working with gradients in the previous versions of the tools. I used to make logotypes. I was a type designer. Now I make animated logotypes. I'll share a project that I did recently. So this is an identity design project I did for Darren Aronofsky's AI studio called Primordial Soup. And I want to make something that looks like microscopic life, but also like lettering and typography. So I came up with this rough sketch, and then I took it to a vectorized form. I vectorized it, drew Beziers, refined it a lot, and then I took it to Flow to render it out. And that's where it changes. Like, I couldn't do this before this easily. So I tried this subtle rendering of an ink effect with those highlights. And then I started exploring with some more organic renderings. And this is what I mean by process. I could have ended with the black and white vector, but I want to introduce more steps in my process. And I feel AI allows me to do that. And finally, I took the frames from the organic renderings, which I did in Flow, and then I took the first frame and then I animated the logotype. So I'm really not trying to make my work faster. You can, but I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to make the process richer and sometimes introduce more steps in between. And I'm really obsessed with pushing the medium forward. The last and the most important thing about my process is that I work with people, and I used to work with people. That's a really hazy photograph of me and my roommate looking at offset print proofs at night. And on the right, it's a friend of mine from the Flow team. His name is Reed, and we still collaborate. So I feel like critique and collaboration is such an important part of my work. Without that, I will lose all objectivity. I cannot work in isolation. So it's really important for me to discuss my ideas with other people, get their feedback, and it just makes my work better. And with AI, it's really easy to isolate yourself and make your own tools. Everything is bespoke, and it's tuned to your liking. But we make work for others. So it's really important for that conversation to keep going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanchit. I love getting time to see people's process. When I see Sanchit at work, seeing the sketches, seeing the work and time that goes into it, it really drives home that AI isn't about pushing a button, and we don't want it to be like that. I think all of us love putting in work to stuff, and you feel that with a lot of people in this room. That's especially true with our next two speakers. We have two amazing, prolific vibe coders, Kalo and Khyati. They go really deep on all of our tools, from AI Studio to Antigravity, and now the new custom tools in Flow. But the thing I love most about them is they're really generous people. I'm always bugging Kalo and Khyati to tell me how they made something, what they were thinking about behind a project. We hang out in chats a lot at Google Creative Lab, and I feel like they're just always sharing something new that they made. With Khyati's work, I'm just always reminded that taste and craft have always mattered and will still matter no matter what the tools are. And with Kalo's work, I actually really feel like I'm getting a first-hand experience of like a new kind of creative coder. He jumps between hardware to filmmaking to all these mediums so fluidly. So I'm really excited to have them come up and share some of the stuff they've been making with all of you.
Hi, I'm Kalo. I'm a creative technologist, and I use code every day.
I'm Khyati. I'm a graphic designer, and I don't write code at all.
But we've both found a lot of value in the practice of vibe coding. Vibe coding is essentially describing what you want in plain language, and then using an LLM to write code that does that for you. We've been prolific vibe coders for about a year now, and it's dramatically transformed our creative process.
So to set some context about me, I'm a designer and a visual artist. Was a type design intern forever ago, had an AR phase, made lots of editorial illustrations for newspapers. So basically lots of bouncing around. And I've always tried to broaden those labels and ask myself, what else am I capable of? What does learning a new skill unlock? And whenever I'm learning something new, I find that it's really helpful for me to start with something old. It makes the unlock really obvious because you literally have a before and after in front of you. For example, on the left, there are these like stage visuals I made for Lollapalooza in 2023, I think. And on the right is a more recent interactive sketch that borrows elements from it, but kind of reinvents it. I was, and I still am, having so much fun with vibe coding, just making stuff, learning about libraries, asking Kalo questions, learning how to use sound and figuring things out like I'm in design school again. Eventually, those sketches turned more into this like personal assignment where I take my favorite quotes from books that I was reading, and then I turn them into these typography posters, like these super expressive posters, only when I felt like vibe coding or interaction could help convey the meaning a little better. I want to read the middle one because I think it's my favorite. It's a simple idea, but also stupid. The thing is, when stupid ideas work, they become genius ideas. Still my favorite. And now that I'm making both the final asset and the tool that helped me get there, I kind of share them both out. And what's wonderful about that is that tiny button in the corner. Other people can not only play with the tool, but they can also riff on it. And this was kind of new for me culturally, like just design culture-wise. Like I thought I'd feel a little cagey about that, because it's like sharing your Photoshop file or your C4D file, and it's like your working file essentially. But it was actually surprisingly really gratifying to see someone take it even further and make it their own. And I made it just for that one, purpose, but they made it more useful for them overall. And I think that's happening so much, like so many new ideas and like micro interactions and features are emerging because now I get to be both a designer and a user at the same time. Another thing that working with AI Studio lets me do is it gives me access to an ecosystem of Google's models and APIs. So I can work with Translate, with sound and Lyria, text-to-speech, and maps. I made Around the World in Good News to set the tone for 2026, like something positive. It essentially helps you explore uplifting historical events and stories of human achievement from across the globe, across time. And it's also grounded in Google search. So there are these like buttons that you can click, and it'll take you to an actual article. I took that ecosystem a step further here, like very, very further. Machine telephone is like the telephone game, but with you and with Google's APIs and like all the stuff that I could come up with at that time, and AI models. So how it works is you enter an input and pass it sequentially through whatever medium or model you pick. And then it's like the telephone game, you kind of see how context shifts and translates, or even gets like misunderstood sometimes over time. So here my input was like marine diatom, and I can ask Gemini to write a poem about it. Now I can be like, okay, what location on the map would Gemini pick if I said it should be inspired by this poem? Now turn that location into a song, that song into a color palette, that color palette into a material, and kind of go on. And I've wanted to make a game like this for the longest time, like a telephone game between unlikely participants, ever since someone gave me this advice that you should look for inspiration outside of your field, because that's in those like strange middles, that's where you usually find new ideas. And I took my sweet time making this, like marinating on the details that don't usually get the love that they deserve. And I know that the assumption is with AI is that you hit a button and something magically pops up. And Sanchit talked about this a little bit. And sometimes that does happen. But even if I get something in one shot, I make sure I don't stop there, because good ideas take time. And if I hadn't slept on it, I may not have thought of this tiny dog here in the corner of the input card to signal that you've hit enter. This feels a little different, like this process. Like there is a palpable difference in designing this way. The only way that I can describe it is it's like the difference between seeing a blueprint of a room versus also getting to be in it. Like you can really gauge the space in the room and maybe design better for it. And because of that, where I would have otherwise resorted to what's maybe like standard UI, which is of course helpful when you're designing for millions of users. But in my case, in these kinds of examples, I feel so much braver to depart from convention and reach for delight and identity, like these are loading states. These should be boring, but they're not. As I vibe code my way through tools, I think it's becoming even clearer to me that my years of practice, skill, knowledge, expertise, experience, all of that still pays off. And I think that's true both for me and Carlo.
It's definitely true. My background is more in video and music production, but in college I studied computer graphics. And today, all I do in my practice is build creative tools and generative art with high-tech software and low-tech hardware. And when I think about tools, both as a user and a builder, there's kind of three main values that I look forward to. The first one is speed. So I want to move from idea to result as fast as possible, and also move on from an idea without feeling guilty that I've wasted all this time. I want control. I want to be really hands-on, to dial in every part of the process and really move between really high level and really specific really quickly. And then lastly, improvisation. Coming from the world of music, I kind of want everything to feel like a guitar pedal. I want surfaces and systems set up in a way that allows for happy accidents and free-flow exploration. And I think code as a medium used to give you a lot of control, but maybe the sacrifice of speed and improvisation. But something changed last year. I think last year, building your own tools was often more trouble than worth it. But I think AI tools have gotten to the point where a lot of the overhead is gone now. And you don't need to get hung up on syntax and debugging. And maybe you can explore that library, and it feels casual and quick and spontaneous. It's gotten so bad for me that I used to write down notes in my notes app, and now I just open AI Studio on my phone, and I would write down the idea I have there, I fire off the prompt, and then move on. And then when I come back, I'd have a V0 of my app waiting for me. And somehow ideas feel very lightweight and quick this way. My practice with code has almost become improvisational, even when I'm working with designers on commercial projects, or I'm brainstorming visuals for myself. I started to often start directly in code. I would build a web app. So last year, we worked on Project Genie. And the designers there, we had to figure out how to create an interface around this brand new category of world model. So it's not a video, it's not an image, it's a whole world. And so our designers came up with this really cool volumetric 3D sphere effect that we ended up building out in code and build out our own tool with our own custom sliders so that we can dial in exactly what we needed. And that was great, because we could make everything in code and then hand it off to our front-end engineers, and we spoke the same language. Another thing I love doing is just thinking about my favorite parts of my favorite software. So I love playing with image editing tools and just spamming like contrast, blur, and sharpness in a loop. So I built this tool for doing just that. It's my super looper, where you can just chain blur, sharpen, and just hit enter and do that 100 times in a row. And you see these patterns kind of start to emerge from the way the algorithms are set up. Sometimes the medium comes before the tool. So last year, when Gemini 3 came out, I discovered it's actually really good at making these animated ASCII drawings in P5.js. So I would ask for a short film, and then it would write the music, it would make the visuals. And they were so charming, I chose to build a tool around them. I'm calling it ASCII Film Studio. And you can write your own little script on the left there, and then tweak in your settings, and then Gemini will actually go ahead and make the film for you. And this kind of new type of co-creation between me and the models, entirely through code. Which is why I'm so excited about Flow Tools. Flow Tools launched yesterday, and it's kind of a new coding layer inside Flow that I'm hoping lets a lot more creatives build such tools inside Flow with their footage. I was very lucky to work on a bunch of really cool tools for that starter gallery you're seeing there. And one of my favorites is this one called Weird Core. So it's a box of kind of 10 trippy, glitchy visual effects that you can then stack together and chain them. And what I love the most about this is I love this random button where you can just keep clicking it and get new combinations. And it almost feels spontaneous and improvisational when you find values that maybe you didn't consider if you were just manually tweaking sliders. I work a lot with hardware as well. And one of the things I always hated about working with hardware is that everything took so long. When you build something, when you code something, you have to run it on the actual device. So this is a project that I've been hacking on for the last 3-4 years. It's called Reframe. And it's an experimental camera that uses a color e-paper display. So it's almost like a digital Polaroid. And you can see you take a picture, and then it stays there on the screen even after you turn off the camera, but you can only have one photo at a time. And the cool thing about e-paper displays is they have a limited color palette, so every image, you need to dither it before you put it on there. And so the dithering algorithms are kind of fun to develop, and normally take a lot of time because you need to see them on the actual screen. But I've kind of, this is an authentic picture from my kitchen. It's not staged. You can see it's embarrassingly messy. But I was prototyping a new dithering algorithm last week in Antigravity, which is another one of Google's coding surfaces. And I had this really nice flow where my agent was SSH'd into the camera, and it would prototype the algorithm. It would put it directly on the camera. I would look at the screen and then give feedback and iterate really quickly directly on the hardware. A cool thing about building your own micro tools is that the audience for them can be just you, or you and your friends, you and your loved ones, you and your colleagues. So you can make them as weird and as specific as you want. If you want to add this crazy liquid chrome SVG border around every part of the UI, sure. I mean, it's your tool. You can go ahead and do that. You have my permission. If you want to work with your data, with your own archives, with your own community's archives, you can do that and make it feel almost improvisational and spontaneous. And I'm hoping that this newfound accessibility of coding brings in an explosion of new projects that I've been doing wrappers on top of archives. So search engines, art, curatorial projects that just we can finally dig into a lot of those digital archives that previously you needed a lot of code and a lot of like a heavy coding background to really do. And lastly, I want to end with a bit of a provocation. I think it's possible to go too far with this. This newfound ability to write and deploy code so fast, I think it comes with a responsibility. We shouldn't be putting out slop into the world or making just for the sake of making just to feel creative. I think just because we're using a model to code doesn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention to every detail, especially when we're sharing our work with other people, with our loved ones, with our coworkers. I think we should be respectful of our time, of our craft, and of our taste. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalo. Thank you, Khyati, so much. I love this last idea that they were talking about. I feel like truly personal software or personal tools, you definitely do feel this inflection point right now. What Sanchit makes, what Kalo makes, or what Khyati makes is so different from what I want to make. Like you saw the silver chrome borders, that's so Kalo. And every one of us in this room, I think, would make something entirely different that's unique to them. That's what the new Google Flow tools that Kalo shared a bit about is all about. You saw a few examples, but I just wanted to play a video so you can kind of see the range of stuff that you could really make with that. Just launched yesterday here at I/O. So those are just some of the starting examples, and I hope people here are intrigued to dive in, because we'd love to see what you all make. This idea of personal tools, we're going to go even further in this next talk with music. So Kendall and Henry are part of the Flow music team. They're a small 13-person team. They're a new member of the Google family of creative tools. And I love this next talk because music is really personal to me. It's really close to my heart. I think it's something that every human in the world should find their own way to enjoy making music. But the thing that I love about what they're doing is music doesn't have to just be one thing. It could be unique for everybody of how you make music and how you enjoy music in your own life. The thing I love about them is that they're using their own product to actually do personal things in their life that are totally different. And I think you're really going to see that in this next talk. So excited to invite up Kendall and Henry.
Kendall, and music has been core to my life since I was young, growing up in the gospel choir at church. And I'm really passionate about how music is a force for expression in our everyday lives and with the people that we love.
I'm Henry. I'm a percussionist and a composer. I do everything from film music to experimental improvisation to drumming in the 49ers drumline. And a little over a year ago, I joined the team that would become Flow Music. And it came from this place of being really interested in how the next generation of technology would shape the next era of music. And that's where I met Kendall.
Yes, and similar to Henry, I was an engineer in undergrad, so studied the technical field, but always had a passion for the creative world. And so found out about Refusion, which is now Google Flow Music, and have been doing a lot of our community and artist engagement work at the company. Oh. All right, and so this could be a product talk about all the new features, but for us, it's really important that we level set that this is something that allows for us to experiment, to iterate, to create new music. And we're seeing a lot of use cases where we're able to broaden who becomes a creator and a musician, as well as allow artists and professional musicians to go a lot deeper with the tooling that we're providing. And so, as I mentioned, my role with producer and with Google Flow Music is really about community and ensuring that we're giving the possibility for everyone to create music. But in my life outside of work, I also host a lot of retreats for friends and families and people in my community. And so I genuinely believe that community, connection are all really core to the human experience and core to how we engage with music as well. And so one thing I'm often thinking about is how can I use technology to enrich the experiences that already connect us? And so at the last retreat that we had, one thing that was really popular was our meditation session. And so, again, a moment we were able to sit, look out in the beautiful Calistoga Hills, and enjoy the time together. And so I'm thinking, how can I use the tool that I work on, that I love creating with, to enhance this experience? And so I thought, let's create a playlist for my retreat. And so in order to create the playlist, I really wanted to think about what feelings and emotions do I want to evoke in the community and with the girls that are at the retreat, and then also tap into our shared love of neo-soul music that we all learned about at dinner the night before. So I went to Flow Music and worked with the producer agent to craft a prompt here that really just communicates everything that I just shared with you, right? How can I build a 5-song playlist that evokes the serenity and stillness and feels rich, moving, and grounding? And from this simple prompt, I got 5 songs that I believe really fit the bill. So we can take a second and enjoy. All right, so as you can see, it's very beautiful, but I wanted to take it one step further. And so using what we have as spaces, so that's our version of music-coded apps, is I wanted to think about how I can create a space that adds on an ambient filter, adds on atmospheric tones and different shimmering effects that will really help to enrich the music that we already created. And so I came to the producer agent with an idea, asking to, again, create the audio filter and add those ethereal effects. And it came to me with a first draft and allows me to iterate. It also took this time to break down what it was doing and use it as a bit of a teaching moment, which I thought was really valuable as someone that had a vision for what I wanted to create and had the music, but didn't necessarily know how I was going to get there. And so from there, we were able to iterate, go back and forth, and create this space. And so as you'll see, as I increase the atmospheric filter and slide it to the right, it will increase the atmospheric sounds. So it sounds a bit more hazy, as you can see there. And then I'll bring it down to also highlight the shimmering effects. Awesome. And so you can do any combination of these 2 effects. You can also add in different filters to mix and mingle and match. But to me, it was really powerful because it allowed for me to add additional elements to the tool and the music. Awesome. And I'll pass it to Henry.
So as mentioned, As mentioned, I'm a percussionist. When I was putting together these slides, our friends at Creative Lab actually said, maybe it's a little more personal if you use a real picture of yourself, not like a product photo. I'll take that as a compliment to my photographer friend, Kat. This is a picture of me. These are my hands. As a percussionist, I've spent countless hours building the fundamentals. And as I've spent that time, I noticed that the way you spend those hours over the years shapes the type of player you become. So as we sort of have this new thing in the world, this generative music creation platform, there's this question, how can I make my practice routine a reflection of me? And generative music creates this interesting net new use case where you can actually create accompaniments that you practice with that fit both the technical requirements of your exercise, but also steer you in the musical direction you want to go. So I set out to explore this using my favorite drum exercise, triplet rolls. I started with a pretty simple prompt, synthwave, steady kick drum pulse, and then 160 BPM, which is the tempo of the exercise. The Lyrium model got the tempo just right, but the vibe was a little too 80s movie, a little too dramatic, not really aesthetically what I wanted, so I moved on to something else. I went to breakcore, which is a genre I really love, super energetic, super exciting. you see here, I got a little more specific with the groove I needed. This is a triplet exercise, so I needed a triplet groove. And Lyria took an interesting interpretation of that, but I realized this genre doesn't necessarily lend itself to the exercise that well. I kept bouncing around genres. I went to swing, which always has the sort of rhythmic style I needed. It's very rom-com montage. It's very coffee shop. Aesthetically, not what we wanted either. I went back to electronic music. I wanted a little more energy. I went to drum and bass. A little similar to breakcore, this is not a genre where you commonly hear the triplet groove I need. This is actually kind of an active area of research, how to make Lyria cleverly reconcile prompts that might be somewhat conflicting or take some creativity. Finally, I realized that if I'm prompting at the level of genre, the results are going to be generic, basically by definition. That forced me to think a little more about what I really wanted to hear and what skills I wanted to train. For any percussionists in the room, rolls are supposed to be smooth and connected while also staying in great time. Thinking more about that got me to this prompt, a little more specific. A specific synth sound, specific type of beat, even a specific snare material. It was way more me. Let's give it a try. When I'm not building software or playing the drums, I'm also a music composer. As a composer, I've noticed over the years, the more of your identity you put into the process, the more expressive the final piece will be. That raises a similar question: how do I build a process that's a reflection of me? One way I've found over the years, even before AI, is to either collect or create unique tools. I've noticed as you accrue this kind of bespoke tool belt, the process becomes more your own and your pieces become more unique. So for example, lately I've been super into chopping up vocals, and specifically I've been into like pitched up gospel sounds, just what I've been listening to lately. So I went to Flow Music and I went to Spaces and iterated until I found a gospel track that I might be interested in sampling. Then I spent some time thinking about the kind of aesthetics and the kind of functionality that could turn this song into a playable instrument. I don't know if this comes across super well as like a final piece, but I had so much fun. Last week I was honestly staying up a little too late working on this presentation, just getting distracted trying to play this out. I'll admit there's a little bit of movie magic happening. I recorded it at halftime and had to speed it up. I do think I'm able to play it in real time, so maybe afterward we go to the demo booth and check that out. I think I can do it if anyone's interested. Another niche process I've been super into musically is this thing called granular synthesis. If you'll bear with me, it's not that complicated. You take an existing track, chop it into tiny grains, and make sort of a new ambient textured sustain with that. So similarly, I was able to go to Flow Music and think through what aesthetics and what functionality would make a version of a granular synth that really felt like what I wanted to express.
Awesome. And then on the topic of broadening who has access, but then also deepening, Henry showed some great examples of what it looks like to create tools that deepen for artists and producers. And then I want to show you all a mini keyboard that we created. And so as someone who is a vocalist but doesn't play instruments, it's been really fun for me to use the different instruments you can create with Spaces to ultimately help yourself develop and understand how these things work, but then also create new sounds that I can sing on top of.
We've talked a lot about making things more unique, making things more for you, more bespoke. But I think we all know art, music, it's really all about sharing and the cross-pollination of ideas and the social aspect. So our simple way to foster this is by allowing you to share spaces with others. For example, this is Colby. He is an evals wizard on the Flow music team, but he also happens to be a fantastic music producer. And when Spaces first came out, he was tasked with exploring it, making a bunch of spaces, and he shared all of them with us. And my favorite is this effect randomizer knob, where he took a bunch of curated effects and gave you just one big knob to play with them. So similarly, I was probably up too late finalizing this presentation, just spending way too much time throwing old demos in and finding these delightfully unexpected combinations of sounds and effects.
And as you've heard probably through all of these presentations, the human is truly at the center of how we use this technology to create, whether we are broadening, whether we're deepening. And so we hope that you all have as much fun as we do with experimenting and iterating and making music with Flow Music. Thank you.
All right.
I thought Henry was going to leave that up here. I was going to do a little. Thanks so much, Henry and Kendall. We're coming around the bend. We're coming into our last talk here. If you're feeling anything like me, your brain's getting a little overstuffed. But as my Aunt Susie always said, there's always room for dessert because dessert fills in the gaps. And we've got a very delicious piece of dessert for you with our last two speakers. Most of the creatives I know kind of get into it because they have these hungry minds and they're novelty seeking. And you know, as these models sort of get more capable every day, I think there's this innately human aspect that is ravenous curiosity that can't be replaced. And that's so true of Shash and Sam. These are multidisciplinary creatives that, among many other things, have been spelunking into the frontier of world models. And they're designers, they're tinkerers, and they're builders, but really I see them as creative explorers. They're building worlds, imagining worlds, then building them, then jumping into them, then figuring out how to operate inside of them, and then sharing what they learn and inviting the rest of us in. At Creative Lab, they're kind of constantly sharing these weird, surreal, almost like vacation videos from all the places they visit in Genie, and they're going to do the same for you today. So please welcome Shash and Sam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam.
Hi, I'm Shash.
And we've been creative partners at Google for pretty much the entirety of this new AI era. And in that time, we've had the chance to play with, study, and stretch the boundaries of countless AI tools, most recently of which being Project Genie. Now, when we first started just over 3 years ago, the state of the art was generative imagery. You could type in a few words and get an image back. That quickly graduated to video. Fast forward to a few months ago, and we were suddenly able to generate entire worlds that could be explored and interacted with in real time.
The simplest way to create a world is by using text prompts. For example, you could ask to be a surfer riding a wave, and you might get something like this. The physics of a video model combined with game-like controls. You decide the direction in which you move, and the environment expands to adapt. As we prompted more and more with words, we began to test out clever word plays. Here's an attempt at trying to create a portal between two contrasting worlds. The interactivity made these great mediums to visualize complex scenes, like thought experiments. This is us stepping into Plato's cave. But the most evident novelty was navigating the world as a character. It completely changed the way we experience the world and set our model apart from the rest of the industry. The question quickly became, if Genie could create these infinite environments, could the characters do infinite things? To get an understanding of the right prompting etiquette for the characters, we ran some quick tests by isolating certain variables. Say the environment was a big white lab, and we had this giant ladder. Now, we could test if the model knew how to make a character climb. or how well it understood a simple concept like jump? What about nuanced actions like interacting with furniture or using electronic devices? All these tests informed us what the model could and could not do.
Now, this idea of words to worlds was such a cognitive leap. You'd often experience quite a bit of dissonance between the world you imagined in your head and the one you'd actually receive. Thankfully for us, that's when Nano Banana hit the scene, and we suddenly had the world's best image model at our fingertips. Now, us being visual creatives and this being such a visual model, we realized that we could steer Genie through imagery, using Nano Banana as a visual engine in which to bait the model to a specific visual style, whether that be photorealistic or hyper-stylized. The other major feature that Nano Banana unlocked was this idea of remixability. We could now iterate upon an existing world, locking in a specific environment while experimenting with different characters. We noticed how Genie had all of this underlying knowledge of physics and the natural world, affecting the body mechanics and level of control across a variety of characters. All of this granular experimentation really helped to hone our intuition for what this model could actually do, while also sparking this foundational idea of world remixing, a landmark feature found within today's product that allows you to lock in a specific, allows you to fork a specific world, much like you would a code base, and perform transformative world edits like style, environment, character, and more. At this point, we really started to lean into these visual biases we found within the model. Say you wanted this car to go faster. All you had to do was add motion blur to the image, and Genie would do the heavy lifting, propelling the car into motion with much more speed and acceleration than before. Same thing with this skydiving example. Take the image, change it to winter, add some floating rings, and suddenly you have a much richer and engaging experience, complete with objectives and game mechanics, all made possible by a handful of image edits.
Another way Nano Banana allowed us to implement game mechanics was by letting me sketch out exactly where I wanted certain elements to go. Here's a photo of a backyard. And this is how I wanted my racetrack to go around the tree. With simple prompts, I can increase my fidelity and define my character. And with Genie, I am now driving that exact track that I sketched out with the right curves, all in the same backyard. At this point, we began to recognize the immense creative potential hidden in the casual photos that we capture every single day. With Genie, it was almost as if every photo in our camera roll was now suddenly a game cartridge. For example, this was taken at the Natural History Museum. I'd always wanted to step into these dioramas. And now, we can explore the diorama as the water buffalo. Notice how Genie expands upon the details in the source image to create this fully interactive environment using its world knowledge. Here's a toy car that we then took drifting around the office. One of our teammates, Arden, had the bright idea of making his own toys. He began by testing if he could convince Genie to activate his pipe cleaner worm. And it did. A big unlock here was that the worm was able to interact with the marbles placed around it. Similar to our previous experiments of using Nano Banana to sort of add in these game mechanics, we now realized that we could simply do so by physically arranging artifacts in the real world, taking a photograph, and Genie knew exactly how to deal with it. Arden then tried a pipe cleaner human, and it worked exactly like we imagined. Entirely bypassing any complex 3D rigging setups, all it took was a simple image and a bunch of text prompts. Before long, it was scoring goals and riding a bicycle. By placing this character on a bicycle, Genie was able to arrive at the most natural way to combine the props and allow the same character to move differently. And of course, we tried photos of ourselves. This is me on a board, and now I could paddle and look around. We could even go an extra step to use Nano Banana to alter the style of the image that you're stepping into. We tested this with a real-life setup. We noticed that experiencing Genie felt drastically different when we went from standard monitors to bigger screens.
Now, as humans, we're very familiar with our own experiences and perspectives. So we thought, what are other perspectives that we aren't very familiar with, ones that we'd never be able to experience otherwise? So our team decided to start experimenting with photos of our pets and how magical of an experience it would be to see our familiar environments through their points of view. And this is where Genie's unparalleled level of photorealism and biomechanics really started to shine. Notice how gracefully the cat navigates the apartment, how it playfully whips its tail in the air, and how it climbs over furniture without missing a step. Or how this gecko expertly scales the walls of its surroundings, creating a vantage point you'd otherwise never see. Even this hamster, and how it waddles around the table, whimsically interacting with the toys in its environment. Genie even sneaks in a little double jump there, which I always think is hilarious. And quick shout out to our amazing teammate, Jocelyn. Every animal you just saw happens to be hers.
Soon, we were motivated to use New York City as our test ground. By taking a photo of one of these iconic yellow cabs, we can now drive it around on our phones. Genie intelligently adapted its character logic based on the physical attributes of the object. Notice how this truck moves differently than the taxi, with this feeling a little bit more top-heavy. Or here, notice how Sam's feet naturally start pedaling as he starts moving. Genie felt entirely different, again, on mobile. It was the perfect platform to run around, capture, and play. We tested this hypothesis with early prototypes, and today, you can try it out too in the sandbox here.
Now, in some of those real-world examples you just saw, Genie is given only a limited view of its surroundings, causing some environments not to be reflected as a one-to-one representation of reality. That's where GeoGenie comes in, a brand new feature that launched yesterday by leveraging existing Google tools and data. Researchers implemented Street View as a native feature within Project Genie. Using Street View, I can scan around the environment, select my starting frame, lock in my character, in this case, a spaceship flying over the Golden Gate Bridge, or soaring over El Capitan as a bald eagle. You now have the ability to transport yourself anywhere in the world and explore that real-world environment as any character you can imagine.
The defining through line of our time at Google and every experiment that you just saw was trying to answer one simple question. What else could the model do? As creatives in a time of abundant research, it is up to us to discover the edges of the model, and thereby the use cases that matter. These things do not come with user manuals, but with inventive play and critical discourse, we get to write them. And as we do so, we begin to see the world differently. Suddenly, everything around us becomes a potential playable character. And we start imagining interactions that do not exist. Take this concrete spheres, for example. It's everywhere here at the IO grounds. I've always wanted to take it for a spin. And this is how I did it.
Now, sometimes we test things in places we probably shouldn't, like during Suze's section of yesterday's I/O keynote. Or right here, controlling a butterfly flying around this very room. Now, in a time where these worlds can be infinite, this is how we use Genie. How would you?
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That's everything we have for you. We hope this has been inspiring, fun for you all, as it has been for us. We honestly totally want to see what you all end up making with all of this.